Now, if I wanted to be really tricky, I could have just left off E, and I could have asked you to see what you would say. And maybe some people would say, I don't know, probably not the people in New York, because that's kind of an artificial thing where some people are visiting and some people are going home at the end of the weekend, so maybe all the people in New York don't represent the population of New York. Well, certainly if we were census takers, that might be the case. But if we just were, not humans, looking down on humans and thinking about it, we might say, hey, that's a reasonable population to say all the people that happen to be in New York at that time. Because when those people go home for the weekend, as tourists, they're emigrating, right? So they immigrate and emigrate for short periods of time. So from the perspective of a biologist, they might be thinking about humans as another species and not thinking about the fact that some of these people are tourists. And that's why they're moving in and out, but just the fact that when they move in, the population of New York swells. We can do the same thing for bacteria, giant pandas, and bark scorpions. If we think of that group as a single species, a bunch of individuals, and we think that that area is meaningful for that particular moment when we're talking about that group, then it's a population, which is why putting E in makes it a little bit harder, but also, in a sense, a little bit easier, because if you think through all of these the first four, you realize they all can be considered populations. It'd be arbitrary to say one of them isn't, and the other ones are. And so all four groups are populations, and E is the correct answer. But keep in mind, they're only interesting populations under specific circumstances. So if you were interested in, maybe the movement patterns of people, and you wanted to count every person that was in New York at that moment, that would be a good population. However, if you were interested in people that were going to be in New York over long periods of time, you might be more interested in the permanent residents of New York. So keep in mind that the word population is a very flexible term that's used for a specific group, but the usage can change depending on the question that you're asking. So this really then makes it a term that we want to think more about in terms of how we would know the size of a population at any time. Because if these definitions of populations are being applied for a specific reason, we probably want to know at that moment, at that time, what's the size of that group we're talking about? What is the group composed of? So let's take an example of whales. And whales, I think, are very interesting because if you look at their populations, they're doing quite the opposite of what many populations, such as the human populations, are doing. So while the human population has been growing exponentially, and we'll get to that term later, what it means to grow exponentially versus grow in some other way, we have to think about what's happening with whales. Whales, on the other hand, have been declining over recent years for a number of reasons. Not just hunting, but all kinds of reasons combined with the fact that we have been hunting whales in recent years. And if you take a look at some of these species of whales in this table, you can see that there's an estimate of how many whales there are. And as far as numbers go, it's quite small because these are global estimates. So if you think about it, the number of humans on the planet right now is more than 7 billion. So it makes it really quite small to think that you could add up all the whales on the planet and not even hit 1 million, which is a lot less than 7 billion. So we might want to ask ourselves, what's going on with whale populations? Why are they declining? But it's difficult to even ask that question before we've documented the fact that whale populations are declining over time, which means we would want to have a way for any population, whether it's whales or humans, of going in at a specific place at a specific time and saying, how many individuals do I think are in this group, in this population? So let me pose this question for you to think about. How would you estimate the number of whales in a population? Let's say I came to you, maybe I was a conservation group or a government agency, and I said, look, we really want to know this information because we want to think about whether whales should be listed as endangered. We want to think about whether their populations are declining. Can you estimate for us the number of whales in a population? Now, of course, the definition of population is liberal, so you can think of any given area. It might be a small area of the ocean. With that in mind, take a minute or two now to think about what you would do to come up with a number that estimates the total number of whales in that population.